What's the weirdo math of football? It's not yards or sacks or passer rating. It's the final scoreboard. Two teams' sums of touchdowns, safeties, field goals, and two-point gambles. And sometimes that sum has never been seen before. Sunday gave us one of those moments. 36-29. A score nobody in NFL history had ever finished a game with. Welcome to Scorigami, the sport's tiny shrine to weirdness. Act 1. The setup. Picture the scene. Tens of thousands of people on their feet, a stadium full of noise, a clock bleeding seconds, and a play that makes announcers snap their heads in disbelief. The Texans scoop a return, rumble to the house as time expires, and Houston decides not to kick the extra point. That one small decision, a refusal of routine, turns an ordinary touchdown into a scoreboard archaeological discovery. The buzzer sounds, the crowd erupts, and somewhere, somebody on the internet types, "We got Scorigami." Act 2. The story, why this matters, the human beats. Here's what makes Scorigami delicious. The NFL has been played since 1920. People have scored in thousands of ways across thousands of games. Certain scores are common, 27-24, 21-17, 24-21, the bread and butter box score meals. Other pairings are exotic. A 36-29 final had never ever happened until Sunday. Why do we even get new scores anymore? A few reasons. Offenses are modern and fast, and analytics pushes coaches to treat the extra point not as habit, but as a decision. Teams go for two more. They cheat on fourth down more. They take limbs off the conventional rule book. That's why the season already had two other Scorigamis. A wild 41-40 Bills win in Week 1 and a 40-40 tie between the Cowboys and Packers. The league is evolving and the scoreboard is paying attention, but the human drama is where this gets fun. Consider the Jaguars going for two in the third quarter and failing, a small defiance that makes 29 into an awkward, rare sum. Consider Houston's earlier failed two-point tries that left their totals in odd places. And finally, consider the moment after the kickoff return. A coaching staff and a player looking at the clock and the history books and deciding something simple. They declined the pat, not out of superstition, not out of showmanship, probably because the math added up on their scoreboard and the moment felt right. That tiny act made them the writers of NFL trivia for decades. Act 2. The tension, the why, and the background. There's a kind of lovable geekery to Scorigami. Fans who obsess over box scores keep a secret base spreadsheet, an archive that tracks every final score and counts the unique ones. As of Sunday, the ledger grew to 1,094 unique scores. That number is both a museum and a dare. There are still roughly 1,400 possible final scores that have never happened. The sport is not done surprising us, but the moment is also a mirror. It shows how the game's DNA is changing. When coaches think differently, when they accept risk for the marginal edge, the scoreboard begins to look like modern art. Analytics whispers to play callers, "Go for two here, decline here, take the sure three and force the opponent's decision later." Those are chess moves disguised as mundane special teams decisions. And sometimes the chessboard gives you an outcome the game has never printed before. Act 3, the twist, the emotional payoff. Beyond the numbers, there's a small, mischievous thrill in knowing you watched history without necessarily understanding you had. Imagine the player who scored the return. In the tunnel, maybe, someone nudges his shoulder and says, "You know you made Scorigami?" He probably laughed, then checked his phone and saw the internet melt down. Or the coach on the sideline who, in the adrenaline after, made a practical call and suddenly found himself quoted in trivia sites. Those tiny private delights are the purest part of sport. You make a play, the world files it under weird and wonderful. There's also a kickback to lore. The old records, the 1984 Bears, the classic blowouts, the one-point games remain anchors. Scorigami is the little ripple that reminds us sports are not only narratives of greatness, but also stories of odd human choices. A failed two-point try in the third quarter, a declined PAT at the end. These are the stitches that make the fabric of football feel alive and unpredictable. Act 3, the lesson. What it tells us about the game. So what should we take from a 36-29 score that no one had ever seen? First, the NFL is more malleable than we like to think. Rules, strategy, and risk appetite ripple into outcomes that surprise even longtime viewers. Second, tiny decisions matter. A single kick, or the decision not to take one, can change not only a win probability chart, but whether an outcome joins history as a novelty. Third, fans love patterns. We are pattern-seeking animals, and Scorigami is catnip for the kind of people who keep track of everything. There's also a sweeter truth. Scorigami humanizes the game. In a sport where narratives tilt toward dynasties and legends, Scorigami is a footnote that says, hey, the game still gets to surprise us. It doesn't change the championship race or the MVP odds, but it makes the Sunday we just watched feel unique in a way that no stat line can fully explain. Final beat, the hook you'll remember. So here's the image. Stadium lights flick off, players pile into the tunnel, a scoreboard reads 36-29, and somewhere a childhood stat nerd screams into the void with joy. The Texans return, the declined Pat, the Jaguars' earlier gamble, all of it folds together into a tiny historical miracle. Scorigami isn't important in the ledger of seasons, but it's important to the story of why we keep watching. Because on any given Sunday, the game will find a way to do something it's never done before. And that's the point. In a league that teaches you to expect precision, a final score that nobody's ever seen is a reminder that football still belongs to the unexpected. It's not always pretty, it's not always logical, but once in a while the math and the moment collide, and the scoreboard gifts us a new number to whisper about for years. That's the joy of the sport. History isn't always made by the big plays. Sometimes it's made by a kick you didn't take. By the book, that roughing the passer flag was legal, but by the eye test, a lot of people saw a perfectly clean sack. With 10 seconds left in the first half, Dallas Turner dropped Lamar Jackson for what looked like a textbook tackle, yet officials flagged Turner for landing with his weight on the QB and enforced half the distance. The penalty turned a near 53-yard attempt into a chip shot 30-yarder and changed the halftime scoreboard to 10-9. Baltimore would go on to win 27-19. Awful announcing. The dispute is really about the finish of a play, not the initial contact. The rule forbids defenders from unnecessarily landing on a passer with full body weight, a measurable standard the league uses to protect quarterbacks, but it's brutally hard for defenders to control exactly how they fall in the heat of the rush. That tension is why former pass rusher Michael Strahan unloaded on the call on Fox's pregame studio. At what point are we going to realize quarterbacks play football too? The complaint is practical, not theoretical. Players and coaches fear that perfectly legal high-effort tackles are increasingly being reclassified as penalties. Awful announcing. What happens next is predictable. Debate and no immediate rule fix. The play will get parsed by officials and the league office, and fans will point to inconsistency whenever the same rule helps one team one week and hurts another the next. The sane fix is clearer visual thresholds and faster explanations from the league when a game-altering flag gets thrown. Until then, these moments will keep producing headlines and heated takes. Baltimore beatdown. Baltimore beatdown. It was supposed to be a night when Aaron Rodgers' arrival in Pittsburgh showed the path out of mediocrity. Instead, Sunday in Los Angeles was the kind of game that forces you to reconsider timelines. Rodgers finished 16 of 31 for 161 yards, 2 interceptions, 3 sacks, and a rough passer rating, and the Chargers handed the Steelers a 25-10 loss that exposed protection failures and a stalled offense. Pittsburgh Steelers. The game's tone was set early. Rodgers was trapped in his own end zone and taken down for a safety, a sequence that encapsulated the night. Pressure, poor spacing, and plays that never developed. The offense converted just 2 of 11 on third downs, turned the ball over 3 times, and never found a rhythm. Even a late garbage time touchdown couldn't mask how thoroughly the Chargers controlled the game. Those box score lines aren't just stats, they're a symptom. An aging elite quarterback can't mask schematic and line deficiencies forever. Fox Sports Now, Pittsburgh faces real questions about roster support and short-term expectations. Rodgers is still a Hall of Famer in intellect and craft, but performances like this force the franchise to decide whether it has the offensive line, weapons, and scheme to let him succeed long-term, or whether they need to pivot sooner than they'd hoped. Pittsburgh Steelers. After the Chargers win, Mike Tomlin's first words weren't defensive. They were complimentary. And that in itself raised eyebrows. Tomlin publicly praised Los Angeles defensive coordinator Jesse Minter and credited the Chargers' scheme for stifling Pittsburgh's attack, a candid acknowledgement that his staff had been outcoached on the night. Saying we have to be better is one thing. Handing kudos to the opponent's coordinator in the immediate postgame also reads like a quiet concession that opponents' ideas are evolving faster than his own. Yahoo Thethau. Tomlin's tone captured two realities: respect for a well-coached unit and the uncomfortable admission that some coordinators are pushing tactical edges that today's veteran staffs must answer for quickly. The headline for Steelers fans isn't just the loss, it's the sense that schematic innovation around the league is accelerating, and teams that don't adapt risk being outpaced. ASUSA, the final play in Houston, delivered a tiny piece of NFL history, a 36-29 final that had never happened before. The Texans' last-second return and decision to decline the extra point created an official final score that Secret Base and score history trackers call a Scorigami, the 1,094th unique final score in league history. As the modern game leans on two-point tries, analytics, and wild comebacks, novel final score combinations are becoming more common. This is the third Scorigami of the season. Yahoo Thethau's Scorigami is more than trivia. It's a neat snapshot of how strategic choices, go for two, decline pat, and late-game oddities create unique ending tallies. For producers and highlight reels, it's a tidy narrative hook, a wild comeback capped by a quirky box score footnote that will be in the season's Remember When packages. CBS Sports. If you want any of these pieces expanded into longer VO scripts or trimmed into 1-minute social reads, tell me which story to prioritize, and I'll deliver the content-only script in American English.